your work. Do you think your personal history is central to your poetry?
It would seem so. To touch on the question that I had asked you, I mean, I'm kind of in a similar situation, although my Chinese was never that good. So, as my cousin's daughter is here, my fiancé is here, so as she knows. But you know, so it's like an interesting thing. My parents were really freaked out. Like I did go to Chinese school, but I really sucked. I've not sucked at anything so bad in life as I did in Chinese school, you know? So my parents ended up taking me out because they were like, you just felt so dumb every week. my mom was like, I was gonna try to teach you guys Chinese, but you guys couldn't understand anything. But I'm like, but Mom, you're supposed to teach us. That's how parenting works. But you know, it's like so late for that. But yeah, so I think that when you think about my family, actually my dad's side of the family is what would be considered Taiwanese, and then my mom's side of the family is like mainlander who escaped Mao, you know? People are like, yes, we know about this. Yeah, you know? So my two sides of the family are like totally different, you know? Like my mom's like, my mom thinks my dad's side of the family is kind of like hillbillies, like Taiwanese hillbillies, where they're all like, you know, fancy and Taipei, you know, like city people, like on my mom's side. But I think that history of always like being split apart, you know, from the mainland, is you know, is kind of like partly why, you know, why I'm here. You know, not entirely. I mean, we went to Taiwan and then here, but it's you can't really, you know, like your work is also tracing back, you know, and there's no way to trace back without seeing that split. And it's such a huge thing for anyone who's a part of the Chinese diaspora. I remember I was traveling in Thailand once and I met another woman who was Chinese Australian, and we were like hanging out like this hippie backpacker place, you know, and we were having breakfast one morning, and you know, we kind of got to the conversation like, oh, well, how'd your family get to Australia and how'd your family get to the US? And she had said that her family had also escaped Mao during the revolution, and that her family actually saw their grandfather executed in front of their family. You know, it's like, we kind of, I feel like for us younger generations, we don't know the kind of pain, you know, the kind of strife and the kind of difficulty people went through. So it's just something that's of interest to me, so it does come up in my work.
Eileen, what is a current challenge for you in your artistry, and in what ways are you looking to grow?
I guess a sort of challenge for me is like figuring out what I want to write about, or figuring out why certain things keep like coming up in my work. Like sometimes, I guess, as an Asian American or a Chinese American woman, I kind of feel boxed into writing about my identity all the time. Like I always have to write like angry Asian poems, and that's kind of like limited me from kind of branching out more and trying things that are more like experimental. But I think also having this identity, like having this body, it like really influences a lot of my work. And like Kelly said, like I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for who I am and my family history. So yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot.
Cool. As a follow-up to that, one of the other questions that was that Eileen came up with was, do you ever feel pressured or limited to write exclusively about your identity as an Asian American woman?
No. And I think that what I'll share is, for me, my writing, what's important to me is to have my writing reflect like the totality of my life, you know? So when I was younger, everything was very fiery political poems. And as I got older, the humor started coming in, because I'm a silly person. I'm like an intellectual silly person, you know? But I also needed it. You know what I mean? Because like, I mean, there's a whole other spiritual conversation around anger and the way that anger moves through people's lives and how it works for people, you know? But I think for me, like the humor and the joy of living, you know, is extremely important. And also, that humor can be complex also, you know? I mean, because my goal is always to put complex ideas into simple language. And I've always said not simplistic, but simple, you know, because that's where the intelligence is. You know, like my husband always says, say it in a way my mama can understand. You know, like his mom is not like interested in any kind of, you know, intellectual conversations about things. You know, but if you, I mean, that's the whole Einstein thing. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, right? So those are the things that are important to me. I mean, I do, like, clearly a lot of my work does deal with, like, Asianness and Asian womanness and womanness, you know, but yeah, it's kind of like, you know, if God makes us all these different people and they're like, you know, this is your assignment, basically, like, let's just say off of a totally, like, narcissistic intention, like, you're going to be interested in yourself, you know, like, let's make you write stuff about this. I mean, I think it can be a part of it, but then it's like, for me, I think it's really important to write about the different parts of my life and also the different emotional palettes that are in our life. And I'm gonna say that again, the different emotions in our emotional palette, which I think particularly for those of us in the spoken word poetry slam scene, we tend to see that like certain emotions in the emotional palette get more emphasis than others, right? So then the question is why? Are the other emotions not important? Is delight not important? Is revelation not important? Is joy not important? Is true intimacy, is like kind of a hesitation, anticipation? Are these things not important? Because they're a part of my life, and I'm sure they're a part of yours. And if we're not writing about it as writers, the question is why? Why? You know? So that's how I think about what I do. Yeah.
Cool. Did you want to respond to that a lot? Because I feel like since that was one of your questions, I wondered if you wanted to respond to anything in there, or if you're good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, although I think I do write a lot of like political poems, I think like people always say like the political is also like, the personal is political. So I do think that helping like writing those poems about my identity have also allowed me to kind of like develop like a kind of like intimacy with my work, and I can also bring like more like subtle qualities to my work through that. So yeah, it's really good points.
One thing I'll add to that is when I was in college, I was an urban planning comparative literature double major. But one of the actually useful things that I read in college was there was a writer, a Portuguese writer, I believe, named Fernando Pessoa. And he would write in persona all the time. So he had at least 8 different personas that were all publishing at the same time. He would even publish interviews between his personas, which is so next level, you know? Clearly with the internet, that's something all of us could do when we go home tonight, you know what I mean? We'd make any number of Instagram accounts, you know, whatever. But I think that's such an interesting thought. You know, that, I mean, the whole Walt Whitman thing, I contain multitudes, do I contradict myself very well, then I contradict myself, you know? But it's like, find out who's all in there, you know? And maybe sometimes it's not, like I'm writing something right now that's like so different than, you know, anything I've written, but I, you know, I think it's just healthy. It's like cross-training, artistic cross-training. You know?
Cool. I know we mentioned when we were emailing that we wanted to kind of talk about how we both like came into poetry. So if you want to do that, and then maybe we'll do another set of poems. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I came into poetry. I actually in freshman year of high school, before like going into high school, I wrote a lot more prose. Like I was always a very like voracious reader, and I liked creative writing a lot. But I was always like writing these short stories for like myself and for my family and whatever. I didn't really expect to go very far, but in freshman year I submitted to this writing competition, the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, and from there I won this honor of being like a national student poet, which was this huge title for someone who had literally just started writing poetry. The first like real poem that I had really worked on was the one that I submitted to win that contest. So I was kind of just like thrown into this world of poetry. But I think like starting that program at such a young age helped me kind of to meet all these amazing poets in the poetry world and kind of cultivate my own voice in doing so. And it's gotten me to where I am today, and I feel a lot more comfortable with my own voice. I feel a lot more comfortable presenting and sharing my poetry, as well as talking about like how I write it. And I got into spoken word because through the National Student Poets Program and all of these other poetry opportunities I was finding, I found Urban Word, and now I'm here. It's
Woo!
I love spoken word so much. I think it's such a powerful form of storytelling. I think it's so, it's like so honest and it's so accessible that I think you don't have to be like a fancy like poet person to really connect to it. I think anyone can, and I think that's what makes it such a compelling form of storytelling. And that's why I'm so drawn to it. And I'm just very happy to see that poetry has taken me here.
Yeah.
Yes.
I got into spoken word when I was in high school. I grew up in the Chicago area back in the 90s. I had a high school English teacher who used to sneak us into the bars to go watch the poetry slams happen, because there were not fabulous organizations like Urban Word to make like youth events for us. So he made his own youth event by just bringing us to the bar. So I was so lucky, though, for those of you who are familiar with some of these amazing powerhouse poets, I grew up watching Patricia Smith and Diane Begest as a teenager. So I got to see their early work, and who knew that, like, I was watching a future Pulitzer Prize winner and a future Pulitzer Prize finalist. So it's been really cool and interesting to see their trajectories in their careers. But that being said, where they are now is like 180 degrees from what the Green Mill was, because the Poetry Slam was founded back in Chicago back in the 80s as kind of like a, as the opposite of the academic poets, as the opposite of MFA, as the opposite of like traditional publishing, as the opposite of the establishment, and giving people get caught up in the idea of like the competition, but the whole point was like Mark Smith was, in the whole tradition of Chicago is when you say Mark Smith, you're supposed to say, so what? Mark Smith.